Oh, it's so good to see so many of you. It's so good to see so many of you at church yesterday. I think a lot of us had bloodshot eyes. We needed that extra hour of sleep. I can't imagine what the night would have been like without it, right? But Halloween is so much fun. Halloween, full moon, blue moon. And so it puts that phrase once in a blue perspective, but getting to gather together to worship together, whether that was online or whether that was in person. Just such an awesome reminder of just that we are such a big, happy, growing, but messy family. And so I hope that you were able to join us yesterday. If you weren't, the sermon will be posted online. We'd love for you to be able to join with us as we spend today and tomorrow really praying in line with just where we live, the context of where we live. So we're not praying for America to be successful, but we're praying for the kingdom of God to go forth where we live, work, and play. And so we're going to do that in just a minute. But I was reminded, just as we read these past couple of days, as we wrapped up the Gospel of John and the Gospel of Mark on Wednesday, we'll start at the Gospel of Matthew and of Luke. But as we wrapped it up, just thinking about that inscription over the top of Jesus's head that he's brought before Pilate, that Pilate seems to be this man of power, of prestige. He's running the Roman government in this area of the world. And so in that, there's this line in Mark where it says that Pilate, desiring to please the crowd rather than releasing Jesus, who he finds no guilt in, it says desiring to please the crowd, that there's this power amongst the people, this mob mentality that takes place that tends to lead them into this emotional response out of anger, out of frustration, out of that causes them ultimately to deny Christ, to demand Barabbas, a murderer, in exchange. And in that, I think right now it feels, I don't know if you feel this way, but I feel like life is on simultaneously kind of on like warp speed, and yet we're hitting these halts, these stops. So we're at home a lot, we're wearing masks a lot, we have limitations on where we can go, of how many people can be in places. It seems like this thing's lasting forever, but at the same time, it seems like we don't have time to think. We have to make quick decisions, right? And so we're forced to go off of emotions. We're forced to kind of look around and go, where's everybody going? And we really are sheep, just kind of being led. But the question is, who are we following? And I think predominantly for me, the thing that I've been challenged by is just asking myself this simple question. It's not non-Christian to vote for parties or to vote in line with certain social justice issues or certain specific things that really draw our hearts. But it is a sin to place those things above Christ, to place anything above Christ. And so I've been asking myself, what is it that allows me to love God, to love my neighbor through the way that I vote, but also the way that I engage politically in discussions? And this morning, I started a new book that I actually posted a quote from that, trying to get a better connection. I guess what I would say is, in the midst of using that power, the question is do I use that power to serve the vulnerable? Because it said, she has a quote in it, this doctor, her name's Diane Langenberg, that as a PhD, as a trauma specialist, as somebody who's responded to just thousands of people in need, and this amazing quote that what it means to actually empathize with somebody is to ask them to teach you their story, to just sit and listen to it with no agenda. And then in that it says a lot about our theology, how we respond to the vulnerable. And so I've just been thinking about that, about how do I respond to the vulnerable, meaning how do I respond to both the unborn and the carrier of the unborn, the mother? How do I respond to orphans, to poor, to homeless, to mentally challenged, to physically challenged, to the elderly, to those that are in hospice care, to those that are struggling economically, to those that are addicted to pornography or narcissism or substances? How do I treat those that are in need? And what I find is oftentimes I'm kind of a Christian bully. And so I want to tell people what to do. I want to force my way down their throat. I actually don't even, as we talked about yesterday, I become less concerned with their transformation and more concerned with them just conforming to my culture, to my comforts. And so I think what's interesting is, as I've come to think that if we as a church really follow Jesus and really engage culture with a love for our neighbor with grace, mercy, and truth. That we don't have to defend American Christianity, the Christian culture, because instead the kingdom of God's present. Do you know what's greater than America? The kingdom of God. And that's weird, is it seems almost anti-American to say that, doesn't it? And so I want to pray that for our church specifically, that in this season, we will identify with Christ above all else. That I will identify with Christ above all else, which means that I'm gentle and lowly in heart, which means that I'm welcoming to the outsider, which means I'm for the disadvantaged to the marginalized. And that I come in incarnationally, as we're going to talk about this weekend, full of grace and truth. Because that's how Jesus lived. And to be a Christian is to claim, to look, to follow, to be conformed to the image of Christ. And so I want to have his mind, his view, and his actions. And so God, I want to pray for that. It's a season where the enemy wants to discourage us. He wants to destroy our witness. He wants us to use power in the same way that he tempted Adam and Eve to become more powerful than God, to exceed what their calling was, God, and in turn they denied you. Father, I pray that I would be out of your way, that I would instead proclaim that you are a kingdom of peace, love, mercy, grace, that you have welcomed in those that are sinners that have run from you, that you are the father who runs off the porch to grab son, to hug him without any speech, without any pretense, that you yell for the calf to be slaughtered, and that there's a celebration. And so God, I pray ultimately that we would be followers of Christ before anything else. That our allegiance would be not only to a Christian culture or a Christian church, but it would be to your Son himself. That we would be continually transformed to have more of the heart, mind, spirit, words of Jesus. And God, in that we would be humbled and brought to a point of praise and worship of you because of seeing you move and transform people's hearts, and in turn transforming their lives, in turn transforming our community. And so God, help us first and foremost to look to you, to look to your word. God, help us to see the vulnerable the same way that you did, that we would be moved to compassion, that they're sheep without a shepherd, God, and so we would care for them.